As you sleep metaphorically, you try to understand the dorsal aspect of the body. Though not your first crossing, you are on the outside, inside this once-removed zone, just beyond the city. Underground, you hear languages not easily recognized, and the sounds are muffled, as though submerged. Hold yourself underwater, placed ever so gently in the hand, like an uncompromising narrative. When a nervous twitch begins again in the inner ear, you wonder whether motion sickness is a loss of equilibrium or a loss of self. Much of your time is spent examining little movements between center and cinder, for instance. For the first time, or maybe not, you begin to feel your age in the arch, Achilles, and left fin, in the unexamined clinamen. You meet everyone you know in letters or at the long syllable's edge to foreground the aspirated consonants, the dripping vowels. The page is wet, and moisture distorts meaning and vision. If objects contain the infinite, then you are only a shade of red. In other words, thirst approximates water. How the body yields in descriptive mode and harnesses speech in order to point and define the margins. While oxygen is taken in, a nebula appears. Trace the pattern so the anxiety held can dissipate. A visceral reaction occurs along the cervical vertebrae where C4 through C7 protrude, exposing a vulnerable contact point. The hues rise, and you visualize a scene where red meets yellow meets sky, scatter effect. You are living what some call a polycontinental trans experience, only no one really calls it that. Racial fluidity, as you know it, is a myth. You are in place and displaced simultaneously, the result of being horizontal in a vertical city. How can you convey the floating border and its edges, which are sometimes smudged, sometimes translucent feathers? Can you reclaim mongrel, strain the semantic residue off? How can you correct your traveler status if you only have a finite time of existence? If you don't understand how gas converts to liquid? Condensation takes on new significance as you unpack not only your things, but your national identity, which is already in a state of flux from an ethnic standpoint. As the daughter of an immigrant, you've had barriers established for you, not by your mother necessarily, but the Union. Not the Union exactly, but the war and the occupation that followed. How to be Eastern when due West, when at the top of the hill in this 18-mile city that sets in burnt orange, your skin, in the end, is a similar shade of foreign. Change is likely to underscore little difference. Be prepared. Out of kindness comes redness. However, repression isn't always marked by intention. It is even more hurt than that. A single image, copper, dust, and this damn rainy city which reminds you of your mother's, in which you will always be a Gaijin or Yank. You are other, overcoming otherness. You are different in the corners, under the same shade, under a protested focus. Your self-exam reveals a macula which may be the result of age or the result of crisis. Winter glides along the force of sacrifice, all room in shadow. The immigrant is seen as exotic, but the offspring ugly and deformed except when a child. Then teenage girls want to walk you around the block in a stroller as though you were a doll, which gives you reoccurring nightmares about being kidnapped. They want to strip you of your clothes when you are 12 in a utility room where no one will see. In this unkept sentence, in this lattice of vagueness lies violence, stain upon tender, withering letter. You are an ordinary color, a neglected Tuesday, just as you are suffering to read yourself. The whole center and the circumference and hanging. This way of dressing is an offering, which is not the same as disappearance. There is pleasure when there is passage, when there is room, when it is open, entrance. No window is futile, even if obscured. You are not that, which is not white. But then again, maybe you are. Under your breath, you let out an expletive, fuck the hyphen. Then louder, fucking hyphen. You do not identify as combined words, linked grammar, division of recognized sloth. There is no dash between Japanese and American, nor after your middle name, which means just that, center, middle, inside. The care with which the rain is wrong inside this cavity, inside the reddening of visage, inside nuance, inside this alarming evening. You make a timetable of when to eat, shit, and catch the train, but never is there enough time to pack, because how do you know what to bring as you meet yourself in another country, especially when you feel that you haven't quite met yourself in your own? A clot occurs in the temporal lobe, and you seep into that sticky mass. You desire to soothe the discoloration, the wall of red, the lack of breathing room when you stand inside searching for exits, which are painted over. Someone, somewhere must understand the loss and the shallow water that hovers. You are that dot of paint, that fleck pitched by a stray bristle, that water damage. The dim light determines how you see your pallid organs, your ethnic face. This stain reflects, then absorbs. And you wonder, if you cannot establish how the tessellating pieces interlock, how can you record it? And so you must move closer, then farther away, in order to understand what it means to border the borders. You are being pulled under. Only you cannot go there, not today, where the tributary is harsh and divides the city. You feel you could skip into the pockets, into the shadowy glass and disappear, but you do not. Nothing is inert or dormant. Not these borders that float, not the one your mother crossed, not this unexpected passage where you must step outside into everything, into this new unknown, which is an intolerable present, which is the year your father dies. You get caught between dreams and waking life, and you feel the wound and the invisible grief, the indistinct edges of sorrow and sadness, water spilling, damaging the words, symbols washed out by a flood. You are born only once with this name, but your mother says this to your partner, and not to you. Some think that border incident is war. But it's also when you cross yourself, backtrack along a preliminary direction and lose your way, when you can no longer stand under the deluge of cells, when the idea of home becomes absorbed, then deposited along the riverbed. Your struggle is to see and be seen from both perspectives at once. Color peels off its object. Separation is difficult under any degree of order. How do you attempt being human when prior to this you are often reminded you are not? April is here, and outside are disposable buttercups. It is the liminal, recognized in trellis, the scarring with an edge predicament. These seasons gather speed, then disperse. Autumn is enormous this time of winter. Boundaries exist on maps. You run into them when you submit your passport. You are annoyed when you are chosen for a random search and the things in your bags are taken out one by one and then stuffed back in. Checkpoints are real and insistent and at other times rather benign. Your sense of direction is confused by this. Single color in an arrangement of equation and not ordinary. There were no rooms but room and a limit, a kind of moss growing between. There was an occupation, and the space within was a space within. There were few to occupy the remains of an offering. That is, the journey is startling, opening with a word, rushing toward the future. Your remnants, watermarked in high tide, is standing on 2 feet, painting over your own history. Hands between your breasts do not indicate foreplay, but, quote, a random search. What is the value of invisibility, if not invisible on the road? You unthread the hem, reconfigure the shades between reds. White surrounds you. Your presence in this absence detracts and complicates the sensation of emptiness. Once a border here, once a border here, once a border here. This color which is not one, which is not monochromatic intensity. There is no place really where you are not alien, but you are studying the cadence of passing from side to side, the grammar of intricate mobility. You desire this. You desire this. You do not desire this. As oxygen is taken in, 8 sharp breaths. You are nowhere near this tint and pattern, nowhere near the agitation. Autumn is held isolate, indistinct, edge against the edge of inquiry. You decelerate to reconcile the geographies, to reverse periodic segments that reiterate grief. In this language, a shaking of the trees, identified through columns of bare silhouette, the disadvantage of a sentence not worth closing. Soon you will deliberate the murky pale, that viscous substance in exposed heart. Unlike any cerebral moment, it is possible for the present to influence the past, to influence the blackened surface. Neither, nor both. In this absence of an accurate reflection, a redacted identity ensues. You rotate without spotting and focus inward. Forgotten the basic sequence of steps, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, vertigo. It is difficult to renew cells as you acquaint yourself with a counter-narrative, as though the slit in retina came before all saturation. The problem was to image an image, to make a place rather than vestiges, to acquiesce to the muddled storm, wherein the false, bricked-in windows left your interior pervasive. Others are made for nowhere, are unmade in compelling strangeness. You surrender to the cuts between, to the internal markings of sympathetic ink. You must acknowledge this scar tissue and proceed. Dare, penetrable, red. Given that you have trouble encoding and retrieving memories, you've begun to make things up. What the brain will do with trauma, safeguard. So much depends upon red with rainwater beside white. Dear hybrid, dear traveler, dear subservient of red, this morning is like any morning. The snow crests the mountain in the distant west. The air is crisp, but soon it will be filled with heat. The letter hasn't arrived yet, or only in pieces. You are waiting in the long line that is called the sentence, in the ubiquitous fragment, an illegible gesture, the smudged text. That is all that you can do. You are drifting in the misunderstandings that come from distorted phrases. This letter is from a disruptive chronology, an alternate timeline. Everything you say will be stolen, folded up neatly and carried across mitigated borders, soggy and soaked with saliva. Then the energy will be converted, as all things in this transitory life. You must borrow the grammar of another until it becomes your own, until this simple act becomes steady, like an impulse. You do not know which to prefer, the comfort of inflections or innuendos, the whistling that comes just before or marks each rim just after. Without describing the exact location, you pierce the seasonal periphery. In the morning, when sleep is nearby, you want to understand the symptom of color. Thank you.